for WMAP, just because the DB side's broken. There's no logic there yet, and just no real support for third-party tools. The third-party integration we have today is mostly one-way. With Beef, we've got hooks so that you can load client-side exploits into Beef when you actually inject into cross-site scripting or CS4F or whatnot. There's a billion ways you can tie the two products together through the Beef hooks. Ronin now has full support for Metasploit modules as well. So if you use the Ronin toolkit, it has a bunch of web stuff built into it, and now you can actually chain Metasploit modules into it by calling out the Metasploit wrapper. Nikto added support for Metasploit logging in the last release last week. So another cool tool that has some basic Metasploit support. But if you actually want to use Metasploit to do web app assessments today, you're basically SOL. We've got most of the building blocks. We've got, or not blogs, we're missing persistent storage and automation. We don't have really good DB schemas set aside for it. There's loose integration with the tools, nothing really out there yet. And it's just not good enough. So we're looking at doing web application security testing with Metasploit and even with our commercial products, and we couldn't really find a good way to take what we had today and use it for anything. We're probably an 80% solution, and all the important parts are missing right now. All the glue's gone. So we said enough is enough, let's do this thing right. But first, why would we spend all of our time working on web app assessments with Metasploit? Metasploit's a server-side pen test tool, it's a client-side pen test tool. What the hell does this have to do with web apps? Why should we even care? Why should we bother? The key thing here is it's an instant delivery platform for 100,000 users. If you write a web testing module, you find a new vulnerability, a new class of vulnerabilities, you run an audit module for that, and we have a strong web app scanner built into Metasploit, you already have 100,000 users for your software. And we take submissions directly from the website and through email. So if you have a cool idea, something you want to test, you want to get feedback from the community, we add it to the tree, you have 100,000 people using it the next day, and you get great feedback. So for us, it's a really good content delivery platform for security tools right now, just because we do have the user base, we do have people using it all the time. It's just a pretty solid way to get code out there right now without having to go through like a mailing list or do a bunch of announcements. We've got pretty mature module and configuration model. We've got this whole idea of modules and options and parameters and mix-ins, and we're using it for about 6-7 years now, so we're pretty solid with it. It works well. It's pretty well documented as well. Tons of existing code. You can pull code not just from our HTTP libraries and our proxy libraries. Any exploit that you use, or excuse me, any web test you write on the Metasploit socket API will automatically pivot through interpreter sessions when you compromise other targets as well. So the cool thing about building like a web app scanner into Metasploit is if you compromise a server through MSO 8067, you can now run web app scan attacks from that server inside the network. So it's all built into the structure and the libraries and the socket. So it's a really easy way to kind of build tools that can pivot as well. If you want to take, for example, you find a vulnerability in a web application that allows you to upload a binary and then run it. If you're doing this by hand, you can go generate an exe, create your Trojan, do this, do that. If you're building it in Metasploit, you can actually leverage the payload generation tools we already have. You can just generate a DLL or an exe or an ASP script or even a jar file directly from the Metasploit API and throw that onto the target and get your shell. So it makes integrating server-side exploits and in basically binary code execution really easy with your web applications. So when you find something like a file upload form that allows you to stick an ASP script on it, you can turn that directly into a shell that you can work with right away. And we've got a pretty solid database backend. Even though the schema isn't there for the web app test yet, we've got a pretty strong structured storage system. We're using it inside the commercial products as well, so we know it works. And finally, we've got a really good data source for attacks, because what better site to look at the logs of than Metasploit.com, is we get hammered so much by so many asshats right now that we've got the biggest database of vulnerabilities to check for on the planet. It's great. So people scam us with everything. I mean, we get scammed by commercial products, open source products, by custom stuff, hit by worms. I mean, our server is just a punching bag for the internet these days. And because of that, we have a really nice database of RFIs. So we took Robert Hansen's RFI database script, a list of RFIs he's seen, scraped through every single log entry in Metasploit.com for the last year, pulled out every other RFI we've ever found, glued them all together, and stuck it in Metasploit. So our RFI database is about 2 times the size of RSnake's, and it's built in with our generic RFI scanner. So it's really, it's a shotgun approach to getting shells through RFI exploits, but it's built directly on our own log files, which are scanned by who knows what. So I'm not sure how the licensing and legalities work. If someone scans our server with a commercial product that has some secret URL in it, and then we take the URL out of our logs and use that in our product, but it's my server, someone's scanning it, damn it, I'm taking my log files. So that's my approach to it. So moving forward, so what we're trying to do is actually make Metasploit a first-class platform for web application testing. The first target for this is the 3.50 release, October 12th. We're trying to identify the short-term goals to really close the app and get things going right now, and then build a nice roadmap for the long-term goals. And by long-term, this is like Metasploit long-term, which means it's probably within 6 months. We move really, really fast, and we've got a full development team. We've got a lot of people that want to see more web stuff in Metasploit. So as far as motivation and time and talent goes, we're definitely there. And as soon as we get our next commercial product out, which will be 3.50, as part of that release, we're going to have a lot more time to focus just on web. So this, I hate doing vaporware talks, but this is vaporware we're actually going to deliver on. So no Duke Nukem here. It's actually going to happen. So the short term, this is actually already out. This is already up and done. So you can play this today. We've got Meterpreter has been ported to Java and PHP. So there's a full-blown Meterpreter implementation, the whole wire protocol, SSL, pivoting, file access, everything done in PHP. So if you have any way you can upload a PHP script, you can actually pivot through that machine and attack other machines through PHP. It's awesome. The same thing works for Java. And the cool thing about the Java one is the Java one works both as a WAR file for a JBoss deployment or Tomcat. It works as a Java applet. If you sign it, you now have a Java Meterpreter running as an applet. Anything that accepts a Java payload basically can load a Java class, can now load a Java instance of Meterpreter. And every single script that's currently in Metasploit will also leverage that as well. So if you've got a cool script like one of Carlos Perez's scripts or some other script out there for doing data gathering, hunting for password files, whatever you want to do, those all work through these non-Windows Meterpreters as well. Something I didn't mention here, but the Linux Meterpreter, the native Meterpreter for Linux is actually mostly done. We're in the very last stages of testing at this point, and we're hoping to actually have that live by 3.50, and that's going to be huge because that cross-compiles to OS X, it cross-compiles to BSD, AIX, everything. The real-time loader has to be changed a little bit for different platforms, but we finally have a basically universal platform, or universal payload for every platform. We have the ability to generate ASP scripts directly from Metasploit. You can generate VBA files, you can generate DLLs. There's a billion ways you can wrap your payloads. But now that we actually have real application payloads, we can go a lot further. So if we can exploit a directory traversal bug in, let's say, Cold Fusion, we can now use that to upload a CFM file with a payload on it and now get a shell through the Java side, through the Java Meterpreter. So it's all about finding better ways to leverage web application vulnerabilities, and then once we actually find a way to get code to run or get some kind of payload to be injected to the target, actually having a useful shell. Because remote command shell doesn't help you that much, but remote command shell with the file upload, download capabilities, and pivoting is awesome. The one real life case we've used this so far is we've had a custom application had an R5 vulnerability. We used the R5 vulnerability to load the PHP interpreter, and then we found the MySQL password. Well, MySQL is only bound to the loopback address. We couldn't talk to it remotely, but we wanted all the data in it, and we want to do it like really easily and lazy-like because we don't want to actually upload PHP-MyAdmin. So what we ended up doing is using the pivot functionality in the PHP payload to port forward 3306 from our local host to their local host, and then connect to the MySQL tool directly to it, logging in with the password we pulled out of the configuration file, and had our own thick client, MySQL client, digging data out and generating reports. So a really easy way to leverage a web app vulnerability and not have to go through too many painful steps to get access to the data we wanted. So the next big thing, which is incredibly boring, but we have to get done, is the app info database schema. So every little piece of data we want to track about applications, about the web server, about the 404 message, about what virtual hosts are available, building the schema, getting that set up, getting that done. The way we're doing it today is we're generating note entries. So we've got this kind of generic table in the Metasploit schema, which can be anything you like. It's kind of an OID style for the name. It's a table with a column and an info structure, and the info structure is a big hash in Ruby. So you can store anything you like into it and query very easily. And they can be tied to either host services or to the workspace itself, which is kind of the project view. So what this is going to do is allow us to take every WMAP module we have today, generate standardized data from it, and also take data from other tools and generate standardized database records, and then start doing things with them. So now you can actually write a module in Metasploit that says, okay, give me a list of every vhost and every target, do these different operations on it, find the results, now display the results this way and store the results this other way. Then you can write another module that takes those results and does something else with it. So the most common use case of that would be something like identify the virtual hosts, identify directories on the target or pages on the target, pass those to a form caller, make the form caller extract the forms, then take the form output, pass it to a tester, a fuzzer, or whatnot, and move on from there. So that's where we're going. We're building kind of primitive structures for things like the 404 messages, the sitemap, all the technology we identify like ASP, JSP, et cetera, the forms themselves, and a structure for the vulnerabilities that we find during the process. And you can tell that it took us forever to do this because the most boring part of this whole job is doing all the data structures and schema and the back-end programming stuff. So we're finally getting on top of it because we need it for this stuff. The next big thing we're working on is doing imports for every major web app tool out there. The NetSparker guys have already given us sample XML, and they're working with us, and they're freaking awesome, so I love the NetSparker guys. The Burp guys are working with us in their XML format. We're actually getting data samples from other products as well. But the idea is that you can go and take whatever tool you use today, whether it's AppInspect, whether it's Nexpose, whether it's W3F or Burp, do your audit how you normally do it, take your results, import that directly into Metasploit, and now you can actually leverage exploits against those targets based on what vulnerabilities you found in those tools. So for example, the NetSparker guys already have ways to run code when they find vulnerabilities. This makes it much easier for you to use the interpreter payload for the command injection, things like that. So you can tie it into kind of your standard network pen testing task just by importing results from your web app team. And if anyone's working on a tool they want to see imported, let us know. All this import code's going directly to the open source tree. And we'd love to be able to support any tool out there. So if you got a commercial product or open source product, let us know. We'd love to import your results. We're also working on doing export directly from the product as well. We're not sure if that'll be 350 or 351, but we have an XML file format already. So every vulnerability that's been imported, you can spit back out again. So the long-term goal is Metasploit will become kind of a data seed where you can bring results in from both internal modules, external tools, external scans, and then spit back out our standardized result set you can then import into other tools using your own reporting, using your own exploits. So for example, the NetSparker guys, we talked about, maybe you're interested in actually importing our data back in and then using that to launch your exploits to your reporting. So we're looking at, this isn't just a single directional import. Too often, open source projects get integrated into other commercial solutions where it's basically just stealing them and using them for whatever they like. We're trying to make sure that we can actually export and import, so we're not just going around taking everyone's data, we're actually spitting it back out again and working with them to import it. So anyways, there's lots of really cool things we can do with import-export. Again, this is one of those things that's a little bit boring to work on, but it's really exciting when it all works and it actually functions the way you want it to work. So for 350, the next big thing we're working on is making sure we can scrape credentials out of clients and then reuse those. So when you compromise a client workstation through, say, a PDF vulnerability, you can now dump all of their cached credentials, dump their saved form fields, steal all their cookies, and now relay those cookies into your own request to go forward again. So it's basically just being able to steal data from the server, steal data from the clients, and reuse that for your next part of your attack. On the server side, we want to do things like automatically find your database configuration, dump your database passwords, dump your OWC settings configuration, steal your saved passwords from LSA, all the other fun stuff you need to go to the next step during a web app test. We think the client credential areas is interesting because let's say you manage to compromise one user within a large bank or a large organization, you steal their login and their password for an internal resource. You can then use that login to get into that internal resource and then deface that page, modify that to do a script source to an autopwn instance, and now compromise every internal user that goes to the internal page. There's a lot of really fun attacks you can do by combining client side of a server side with web app with database. I think we're checking out time. I think we're good on time. For Metasploit 351, that's our next release after 350. We usually do about 30 days, but because we're hitting holiday time schedules, we're probably going to split it out a little bit, make it about a month and a half or so. So for this release, the goal is to actually make WMAP work again. So taking all the effort that we're doing in 350 with the database types, with the new records, new modules, and gluing it all together so WMAP works the way it's supposed to. And the idea here is you basically just do WMAP scan, give it a URL, it scans everything, enumerates everything, does content scanning, testing, finds vulnerabilities, finds exploits, generates exploits, runs exploits, gets you shells, installs your screensaver, and you're done. So it should be pretty neat when it all works. And that means adding the front-end scanning tools back into it, so having WMAP spider commands, WMAP proxy commands, everything else integrated back to the Metasploit console again. And this is probably when we'll do XML export again, so you have basic reporting directly out of the product as well. We're also adding a ton of additional scanning models to fill in the gaps of what's missing between what we have today in WMAP, what we need to actually do all these things that we're talking about. 352, we're shooting for mid-February on this, and the idea of that is actually doing our advanced form testing. So being able to point out a form, test it, find vulnerabilities, and do really good form testing built into the open source product. Hopefully we'll have automated web app exploitation, so it'll find the bug, generate the exploit, link you the exploit, and call it done. And if it's something like a server-side bug, like RFI, LFI, eval, actually get you a shell, and then move on from there. We also want to start integrating directly with things like Google Dorks, so you can actually use Google and other search engines to identify vulnerabilities, then leverage that to actually run your attack and kind of narrow down your web testing. So we're thinking the time frame, this is about right to make it work. The biggest thing here is actually integrating a B-flight capability for client-side exploitation as well. So anytime we find a cross-site scripting or some other way to inject content into a target site, you can then hook any client visiting that site into the Metasploit engine and then run attacks on those clients. You can also use those clients to steal their cookies, to steal their credentials, to relay attacks to other systems. You can throw client-side exploits at every user that happens to hit the site, whatever you want to do. So we're building a full B-Flight capability into the product going forward. What we really want to see is actually have, in the Metasploit console, have a session that's actually a cross-site scripting session, and have commands available like a interpreter, but for a web client, basically. So it's going to take a while to make all those things happen, but we think